I believe we're sitting around because of the myriad of council activity that this administration involves itself in, and not to mention the huge committee structure, which still is yet to be addressed, albeit the meetings have been reduced. So for me, Mr. Chair, that's what it's about. It's about giving the giving the chief executive much more, twice the delegated authority, empowering the executive leadership, but also responding to the public's ongoing cry for us to have better oversight, tighter oversight, and closer oversight of our budgetary and financial issues. And I don't think there'll be one of us going out on the campaign trail in 12 months' time promising less oversight. We will be in those town hall meetings saying, oh yes, no, we're all for we're all for tightening the reins, not loosening the reins. And if there's anyone that's going to be running that campaign, I'd like to see how they go. The public are expecting us to tightly run the finances and operations of this council, and I believe doubling the delegated amount to 15 million certainly is a good balance and a good trade-off. I also don't accept, Mr. Mayor, the report's comparison of Moby having a 10 million delegation, ACC 10 million, and NZTA their delegation as well. It might be more than that. Those Moby, ACC, and NZTA are, as the report notes, public sector organisations, but they're not owned by the public and directly governed by elected representatives on a daily basis, like the Auckland Council is. So to say that we've got a capital spend or an OPEX spend comparable to those organisations, I think is unfair, because they are not under the same critical public watch around their governance and financial expenditure as this council is ongoingly and increasingly. So, in conclusion, Mr. Mayor, I believe my amendment doubles the delegated authority and strikes a balance between public's expectations, and we get those emails, we see the letters to the editor every day of the week, for greater oversight, not less oversight, as well as enabling our chief executive and his executive leadership team just to get on with the job and do things with greater pace and momentum. So it's, I don't even know if it needs a vote. It's so
good on you, Councillor. Councillor. Yeah. Councillor Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I regret that Councillor Quacks and it's rather Councillor Brewer has not been able to come to the meetings that we have, and in fact it kind of highlights the clumsy governance structure that we have too many meetings to actually come to the point that we want to take the decision, because this has been traversed the quantum, as he puts it, and I acknowledge Councillor Brewer for being the chief council watchdog. In fact, I think he's become, to a degree, the Winston Peters of the Auckland Council. So I really respect his point of view. I do respect his point of view and his watchdog. Well, he has that sartorial excellence, and he just carries it off so beautifully. However, I want to know whether the CEO, because Councillor Brewer couldn't be present when we talked about these numbers, maybe the CEO could give us some examples of the types of situations and those types of delegations and how they would be exercised, because we have explored this in some depth in terms of the contracts and so forth, and looking at operational efficiency while actually balancing the issue of oversight, democratic oversight on these. So could the CEO give us a little more insight into the types of situations that we might be seeing this activity take place?
Through you, Chair, perhaps if I could just mention that we did traverse a range of numbers through the discussions with the CEO Review Committee. So from, I think from memory, canvassing up to 20 and then 50 and 75 and 100 million. So we've run the rule across what would be the right place to land, and there are some details in the report that just give you the sorts of numbers. And at 20, then you really are at 20 and above 20 million if we have a very small number of contracts let at that value, and the Tenders and Procurement Committee would continue to operate around those large ones. So this just means that the majority, with a very minor increase in my workload, because I'm signing contracts every day, we sweep away quite a bit of paperwork for the Tenders and Procurement Committee, and involves less of that time for those members and the paperwork that goes with that. So these are not, these are just normal service delivery contracts. They'll be, ranging from capital works items, swimming pools, libraries, service delivery contracts in the leisure and parks and sports and recreation area. So it's just our everyday delivery, and it's just lifting the cap at which you send it through to tenders and procurement.
So is there any concern in your opinion, Mr Town, then, in terms of the need for that, the public's expectation in terms of public oversight? Where do you see that balance falling in terms of a policy-based decision taken at a governance level and the execution of that? Maybe you'd just like to for those members of this governing body who have concern that we need to put in place accountability and effective public oversight, can you give us some assurance on that point?
So obviously, through you, Chair, so what happens in tenders and procurement, of course, is it's all public excluded, essentially, the actual detail. So what we've done is we've already taken the step to say we will now routinely publish all contracts that are entered into by the Auckland Council, 100k over, and they will routinely be published on the website. So we're actually increasing the public oversight of what we're doing by taking that step, and we felt it was important to do that in advance of asking for the formal delegation to change. So I think in response to Councillor Brewer's amendment, we've actually already taken those accountability and sharing of information steps that you would want to see happen in a more mature framework that we're now in.
Thank you.
Right, very good. Now, Councillor Callum, then Councillor Dick.
Yeah, thank you. Having, as I mentioned, not been on this committee, but having attended every CE committee and getting involved in the ongoing discussions, very comfortable with these recommendations. And having spent the last hour debating our committee structure, and now that we'll obviously have some more time up our sleeves, we might see 21 of us around the table as opposed to the normal 5 or 6. And I'm hoping that those who support the amendment today will be some of those at the committee meeting. Thank you, Worship.
All right. Probably leave that agenda item behind. Councillor Chris.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'll support these recommendations, and I think from my reading of the little graph here, and the Chief Executive can enlighten us further, but the number of contracts that might be between this and what's recommended is negligible, but it might grow in time. So I'm happy with the recommendations, other than in A and C, and we've just spoken about portfolio leadership and the need to draw that out further. I'm just wondering whether under A and C, the delegation should be Chief Executive, Mayor and the relevant committee chair, so that you have the three, and I think that would be a safer bet in that regard. And again, you're not chewing up a whole lot of paperwork. So is there an appetite for Chief Executive, Mayor and the chair of the relevant committee?
Got to be careful about too much bureaucracy.
It's not bureaucracy, it's governance.
Well, yeah, be careful about too much governance sometimes too. It's an either-or situation, Councillor Chris. Normally it's a relevant chair. Doesn't often come to me, So I'm the fallback really in the end. So it's an either or. I don't think it adds much, really.
Mr. Chairman, as the mover and just conferring with the seconder, we would be happy to see that inclusion.
Whatever. You're the movers and seconders. Now, Councillor Dick, I was sorry, I have been dazzled by the boy from Papakura's tie and it completely took me off my stride.
I try to wear a bike tie.
Yeah, I know, but that very
Clearly it
startling
wasn't
pink.
quite
loud.
Clearly it doesn't compete with...
Very distracting, I have to say.
Councillor from Papakura, whose name escapes me from it. Look, in terms, I sort of struggled with this a little bit, given the fact, and it's been well canvassed by Councillor Brewer around public sentiment and public perception of local, not just this council, but all local government at the moment, that there is this perception that everything is being run by the officials and the elected members are no more than rubber stampers. And in terms of the workload that the Tenders and Procurement Committee would be relieved of, if we take the examples that have been given, it's just 18 contracts, which is given the period over which that spread is only about just over 4 contracts per year. Was that right, Stephen? Have I done that? Is that correct? So those 18 would now not go to the Tenders and Procurement Committee. They would be delegated to you.
Through you, Chair, and the next line up as well, because they would then fall into the committee chair and the mayor. So there's 20 up to 21.
So there's 18. Is that right?
18 and 3.
18 and 3. So there's 21. And there's only and of those, then there's just 5 over the last couple of years. So in terms of the extra or the relief of a load on that particular committee, to me, doesn't seem to be all that great. And I balance that up, and maybe the report was a little remiss in not giving examples of what those contracts might be. So it's a bit of a hole, perhaps, or something that's missing from this report, that they could have given examples, perhaps, in terms of the nature of those contracts. So it's not a great burden that the Tenders and Procurement Committee would have been under if we had kept that delegation at $7.5 million. But however, I do agree that the Chief Executive's delegation should be increased, and I've sort of been mulling over this for some time, and so I'm very happy that Councillor Brewer has put up this amendment of $15 million, which I'm happy to second and will be very happy to support, given and this is no reflection on the ELT, no reflection on the Chief Executive, but rather a realistic look at what the public of Auckland and perhaps even the wider public of New Zealand is telling telling elected members or telling local government about how it should operate, and that perhaps there is more room for elected member decisions and elected member responsibility without wanting to micromanage, but certainly I think it is important that we do ensure that decisions and like this over contracts do remain with officers' recommendations do remain the domain of the elected members.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
Support Councillor Brewer's.
Look, councillors, I think, Councillor Denise.
I am going to support the original amendment here, while I can understand my colleagues' wish to temper it down a little bit for the just-in-case factor. In terms of public perception, we do have a strengthening management team, and I say strengthening because I think it's strengthening progressively with a large degree of commercial acumen, and in conjunction with that, increasing acumen for regards to public oversight. So the move to increase transparency, Mr. Town, has been really welcomed, and something for which we can all get behind support and ask for more. This clearly, in regards to the tables provided, our sheer size calls for this, and we need to be progressive in how we deal with contracting at this council, and in line with our committee structure talk, we need to get stuff done.